I've aged definitely over the last 8 years, but Helmut Marko had announced me as the new team principal, and I didn't want to let him down. Did I feel ready? Probably not.
When I first joined Red Bull, huge change culturally for me. The easy thing was to stay at McLaren and carry on there. It was comfortable. But I just felt I needed a new challenge. I felt I was getting a bit stale at McLaren.
It was quite clear that Red Bull's objectives in Formula One weren't to be a stiff corporate partner. They wanted to break the boundaries. They wanted to do things differently. And there was a much more fun vibe about the team.
Just before the Silverstone race, I walked into the paddock. This character sprung out from behind one of the trucks and said, "Psst, Adrian, my name is Dr. Marko. I am from Red Bull. We would very much like you to join. Here's my card. You will ring me."
The 2023 Formula 1 season saw Red Bull win 21 races. Yes, the team lost only a single race in the entire season. Now, this is a far cry from a team that debuted in 2005, taking over from Jaguar, and was basically looked at as a drinks company and an outcast. Since then, Red Bull has gone through various phases. First, it saw its rise in 2009 when it started winning races. Then it had its dominant phase from 2010 till 2013, where it won 4 consecutive titles. Then came the sudden decline in 2014 when Red Bull just could not compete with Mercedes. What followed was a 7-year barren run where Red Bull could not win a single title or even challenge for it. Then came 2021 and we saw the resurrection. The team first rose as a frontrunner in 2009. It saw its first major fall in 2014 and it has seen its resurrection in 2021. So why has the team gone through these 3 different phases? What led to the rise of Red Bull? What led to its decline? And finally, what has caused the resurrection? So without further ado, let's get straight to it. Now before we begin, a few housekeeping notes. Just hit the like button. If you're new to the channel, please hit the subscribe button. It will help the channel grow. And most importantly, by the time we are done with the video, just leave a comment with what are your views on the topic. So I'm hoping you guys have liked the video. Now let's get to the good stuff. Now first of all in the video, let's take a look at what led to the rise of Red Bull. Now when we talk about the rise of Red Bull, it was quite peculiar because, well, if you talk about everything that Red Bull has done in Formula 1, it is somewhat peculiar and groundbreaking as well, because the team has basically broken conventions. You don't expect teams to follow the kind of path that Red Bull has and succeed. First of all, something that was arguably outlandish was Red Bull trusting the team in the hands of Christian Horner. Now, when Christian joined Red Bull as a team principal, he was even younger than the driver David Coulthard, who was going to be the first Red Bull driver. Yes, that's how young he was. Even right now, he's not the oldest team principal on the grid, even though he's been part of the grid for 18 years now. There was something that Helmut Marko and Dietrich Mateschitz saw in Christian Horner that led to them trusting the Formula 1 team in the hands of Christian Horner. Now, once Christian Horner was part of the team, the next part was building on the vision that Horner had of an F1 team. Now, when we talk about the vision, the first man that came to Horner's mind was Adrian Newey. Now, Adrian Newey at that point in time, when he joined Red Bull, was arguably he did not have the best of reputations. Now, even though by then Newey had already produced brilliant cars with Williams as well as McLaren, and both of them had dominated and won championships, there was still a 5 to 6 year lean phase that Newey was on as a McLaren technical director. The kind of magic that Newey had in the 90s where he built some groundbreaking cars, it just was not there at McLaren when Red Bull and Christian Horner ultimately showed the kind of faith and gambled on going with Newey and building a team around him. As we can see, after 18 years, the gamble has worked. Horner was able to provide Newey everything that McLaren and Williams in the past could not. That's why Newey has been part of the team for more than 15 years now. Now, the next step in Red Bull's rise was trusting and investing in a young talent like Sebastian Vettel. Now, Sebastian Vettel had been He had been supported by both BMW as well as Red Bull in his junior career. By the time Vettel did his debut with BMW, Red Bull was convinced that the future of the team will feature Sebastian Vettel for sure. Now, of course, Red Bull had tried to approach Fernando Alonso as well during this time, but that did not work. Having said that, the team finally put all its faith behind Sebastian Vettel, and we saw the results. We saw Sebastian Vettel become the youngest pole position winner, race winner, world champion, and all of them under the Red Bull umbrella. What the team was able to accomplish during this time was that it got hold of one of the elite talents on the F1 grid. There was Alonso, there was Hamilton, and there was Vettel. These were the three drivers that stood out on the F1 grid. While the other two were not available, Vettel did the job perfectly. Now finally, the final key important point when it comes to Red Bull's rise during this time was the fact that the team was able to capitalize on the ban on in-season testing. Now during this time, during the 90s and 2000s, one of the key differentiating factors for teams like Ferrari, McLaren was the fact that the teams can put endless budget on track runnings and in-season testing. This was where these teams would ultimately gain performance and develop their cars. Red Bull was one of the teams that got the jump on the fact that the in-season testing was going to be banned from 2009 onwards. When that happened, Red Bull, with its simulation tools and the wind tunnel, was arguably able to have one of the best correlations from wind tunnel to the track. While contenders like Ferrari and McLaren struggled for correlation throughout this era, Red Bull was one of the teams that was more or less spot on with whatever parts it put on the car, and it worked. That proved to be one of the key differentiating factors because this was a major change in Formula 1, and Red Bull was the team that adapted to it better than almost anyone else on the grid. Now it was these factors that ultimately helped Red Bull become a dominant force from 2010 till 2014. The team won 4 world championships, both constructors and drivers. It dominated in 2011 and 2013. However, in 2014, things were about to change. With 2014 came the new regulations, and it coincided with the fall of Red Bull. Red Bull was no more the benchmark in Formula 1, and it had been displaced by Mercedes. Now, the 2014 F1 season was the advent of the V6 turbo hybrid engines. That was the time when the sport pivoted into a completely different direction, and Red Bull was just not ready. The team had underestimated the impact of the V6 turbo hybrids because from 2010 to 2013, Red Bull was powered by Renault. Now, Renault, even during that time, from 2010 to 2013, it did not have the best engine on the grid. It still belonged to Mercedes and Ferrari. However, the engine was close enough and competitive enough so that it did not make a massive difference. Red Bull, on the other hand, would try to make and build its competitive advantage on the basis of its chassis and aerodynamics. That is what Red Bull banged on. Now, when the 2014 F1 regulations came, Renault's power unit was below par. It was so poor that Red Bull could not even compete in any which way with Mercedes, and even struggled at times to compete with the teams like Williams and Force India as well, who were powered by Mercedes. Now, the reason why this happened was because arguably Christian Horner and Red Bull, they underestimated the kind of impact a turbo hybrid engine could have. And Mercedes, on the other hand, it was able to extract a lot of performance through its power unit and ultimately left everything else redundant. Now, before you look at the second reason, Red Bull's struggles from 2014 continued until 2020. Until 2020, Red Bull was unable to challenge for the title even once. That's a 7-year barren run. Now, talking about the second point, well, one of the reasons why Red Bull's struggle continued for this long was because it was a customer team. In 2014, the F1 grid had 3 power unit suppliers. There was Ferrari, there was Mercedes, and there was Renault. Now, Red Bull, being a direct competitor of Ferrari and Mercedes, just could not procure power units from either of the two teams. And both of the competitors flatly declined supplying engines to Red Bull. Ferrari, on its part, was willing to supply Red Bull with an year-old power unit. Now, when that happens, you know that you're not going to fight for the title. That is precisely why Red Bull was pretty much limited. It was a customer team, it did not produce its own engine, and hence its fate was not in its hands. It had to contend with an underpowered and below par power unit throughout this era, and it just could not make the kind of gains that it would have wanted. Now, the third point was the fact that Mercedes got a massive head start. Now, one of the major issues with Formula 1 has been the fact that in-season development has been stunted pretty much for the last decade or so. You cannot make major improvements on your car during the season, and that is something that has been the case for more than a decade. And not only Red Bull, a lot of teams struggled because of this, and ultimately it gave Mercedes a major head start. The power unit that the Mercedes had, as we've discussed in another video where we talked about the Mercedes rise and dominance, The power unit that the German team had, it was so good that until 2018, there was no competition for the Mercedes power unit. And even when Ferrari produced a power unit that could compete with Mercedes, it turned out to be illegal. So yes, during this entire era, Mercedes had such a massive advantage in one particular aspect of the car that determined the performance that Red Bull just could not keep up or even be competitive to a level that it could challenge for the title. Now the final point when we talk about Red Bull's downfall, well, it has to be the loss of Sebastian Vettel, and it hurt the team a lot. Now, of course, there are many that would feel that as a driver, Daniel Ricciardo would have been a like-for-like replacement, and many would feel that Max Verstappen, when he joined in 2016, it should have been enough to replace Sebastian. That was not the case, because when a team is winning, and it is winning with a particular combination, when one of the vital cogs are missing, it does take time for the team to rebuild and get back to its most efficient phase. Losing Sebastian Vettel hurt the team in that sense, and one could argue that it took Red Bull a few years to get back to its feet. Now, the Red Bull's barren run ended in 2021 when Max Verstappen won the 2021 Drivers' title. And since then, the regulations have changed in 2022. Red Bull has been one of the earliest adaptations and has been able to have a head start over everyone else. Now, the question is why this resurrection happened. Why was Red Bull able to come back after having 7-year barren run where it could not even challenge for the title even once? Let's take a look. Now, one of the major things that Red Bull did during these 7 years was the fact that it was able to still keep the core group in place. Now, there have been reports, and even Christian Horner has admitted that he was reached out by Ferrari. And then there was a conversation with Helmut Marko which went on throughout the night. And after that, he was convinced by Marko to stay with Red Bull. Even Horner has been instrumental in keeping Adrian Newey with Red Bull, because during the early years of the turbo hybrid era, Newey has admitted that he lost his motivation. He knew the team was limited and he felt a bit helpless because there's only so much you can do with the car if the power unit is below par. That is why there was a time when Newey thought about leaving Red Bull. And it was during this time that Adrian Newey struck a deal with Aston Martin, and basically that was the birth of Aston Martin's hypercar project, which Adrian Newey conceived and developed. To add to this, even Helmut Marko was the constant fixture in all of this. These three founding members of Red Bull were still together in 2021 when the team was finally able to get back on its feet. And why it was able to do that? Because the core group stayed in one place. Then one of the other major factors that helped Red Bull was the fact that you did not see too many massive layoffs. Whenever a team starts performing badly, more often than not heads roll. More often than not, you see people losing their jobs. You did not see that with Red Bull. On the other hand, Red Bull identified what was the major issue, and it worked on it and ultimately came back to the top in Formula 1. Next up, you had the team finally finding its successor for Sebastian Vettel, and the successor was Max Verstappen. Now, the team had secured Verstappen's services in 2014, but he was still an unfinished product. The team persisted with the Dutch driver, and in 2021, he was ready to fight for the title, and we saw how well he performed when basically the pressure was at its peak. With Max Verstappen, the team has found another generational driver who is basically one of the elites of the grid, arguably the best on the grid right now, and has been able to extract everything possible from the car and is arguably doing a better job than what Sebastian Vettel did during his reign. Finally, the most important point was Red Bull having the wherewithal and the nerve to actually go for the Honda gamble. In 2018, when Red Bull first associated with Honda through AlphaTauri, it was a gamble that was pretty much rooted in a belief that Red Bull knew that it could not win championships with Renault. It had seen enough years and seen a lack of progress that was starting to hurt the team more and more, and even led to a lot of demotivation. Honda at that time was coming off a massive failure in terms of what happened with McLaren, and even it was low on confidence. During this time, Red Bull and Honda, they got together. Red Bull knew how to make the most of the resources that Honda provided. It let the Japanese manufacturer do its thing and build the car around it. In the end, what we saw and what we've been looking at since then is Red Bull overcoming its major weakness in terms of power unit and not being a customer team that is being limited in that particular area. Now, we've taken a look at both the rise, the fall, and the resurrection of Red Bull. Now, there is one major question: what is in store for the future? Now, for the next couple of seasons, well, you can expect Red Bull to be the favorite to win the titles. The major question is how Red Bull fares in 2026. This time around though, Red Bull has learned from its mistakes in 2014. 2014 was the time when Formula 1 moved from the aero-dependent cars to the power unit-dependent cars. And in 2026, we will be looking at the same migration. Now, during that time, Red Bull's fate will at least be in its own control. Unlike in 2014, where it was a customer team, in 2026, Red Bull will be a works unit. So yes, in terms of learning from its mistakes and plugging the holes, Red Bull has been doing the best job, at least for now. The team has learned from its mistakes, and you can see that the future looks bright for the drinks company. So these were my views where I recapped and showed what were the factors that led to the rise, the fall, and the resurrection of Red Bull. Do let me know what you guys think. What are your views? Please drop it in the comment section. Thanks for watching and see you next time.